Let us put our hands together to welcome our panelists. And Daniel, please.
Hey, thank you once again, Cecilia. This is not really a panel discussion, actually. We wanted to give you time to ask questions about the presentation that Anil and Kaim gave just now. Like what Cecilia mentioned, you can either stand up later and ask your question. The mic will be moving around, I presume. My girls will be doing that. Or if you are shy, what you can do is just to write down your questions and then just give it to one of the girls there, and then they'll pass it to me, and I'll read it for you. All right? So there are two ways of doing it. Essentially, while the questions is framing in your mind, you may have some clarifications that you want to consult the Kaim or Anil or even Raymond later on their presentations. Please do so. Meanwhile, I'll give you some time to think about the questions, and I'll just carry on with some discussion with Anil and Kaim and Raymond. I think what happened just now is that Anil has given a very comprehensive picture about BEPS and the transparency requirements and what are the compliance and reporting requirements that one company needs to do. And not just the company, but also the country as a whole, because there's all these multilateral agreements that we have signed with, you were mentioning about 70 countries or something like that? Yeah. So there are a lot of responsibilities that a company needs to do. And I think he has also mentioned many times the key word to all these things is transparency and substance. Correct? I know. And then, of course, later Kaim came in to say that to talk more about a bit more about substance, giving you a picture of what is needed to show that you have substance. And Kaim has very graciously helped me as the CEO of Labuan IBFC to promote Labuan. I know there are a lot of stories about Labuan, what you can do using Labuan structures to create the substance. But essentially, I think Kaim has given again a very good solution, so to speak, on how you can create a substance. Which brings me to Raymond. Raymond, you have not heard him yet, but essentially he's the owner, actually, or he's a regional managing director of Kensington Trust. Kensington Trust is a trust company in Labuan. We have about 43 trust companies which are already in Labuan. Anything that you want to do in Labuan, you need to go through a trust company, and he's just one of the many that are present in Labuan. Essentially, why Raymond is here is because in Labuan, he creates the facilities. He has the facilities for creating the substance which Kaim talked about just now. So we thought that it's good to rope him in so that he can also tell you what he can do for you in creating substance. All right. So, but I will let each one. I will ask a few questions, of course, myself. But because Raymond has not been given a chance to talk yet, so Raymond, maybe I start with you. I mean, just now I talk about creating substance. How in your experience, how do you do that actually? If you may, just say a few words about that. Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Daniel. Thank you to Labuan IBFC to invite me here. Before I start, just to give you a proper perspective. When I woke up this morning, I just realized I've been staying in Labuan since 1984. So I use my calculator rather than, nowadays in modern technology. I've been living and staying on and off in Labuan for about 32 years. So that will give you a perspective on my background other than the CV that you have read. Now, to answer Daniel's questions, we have to look at from the background of what the topic today is about BEPS. Ms. Goh and also Anil has spoke about BEPS, and Ms. Goh talked about Labuan and the many products or uses you can use. Essentially, when we promote Labuan in my group and all this thing, so we normally talk about what is actually Labuan offer in terms of operational activities. For example, trading, for example, fund management or administration, and also insurance and insurance-related industries, specifically on captive insurance, where you can have activities, operations in Labuan in this context. Now, should I continue, Daniel?
Yeah, go, please. You
No.
have lots of time.
Okay. Now, as far as experience is concerned, Daniel asked me that question. Essentially, when you talk about experience, we can go into a long discussion. So, but I just want to focus on 3 specific areas of how we do that or implement that in Labuan. Now, for example, I will classify into 3 segments. One will be office space or substance room availability. And then secondly will be what will be our typical clientele. And third will be talk about skilled labor, or what Ms. Goh has said, where you primarily speak English. So I'll go back to substance rooms, or substance office. We started this much earlier, even before 2006, but we just go on 2006 where we set up a business center or substance room just like those in Regis. And we started with about 8. By 6 years from later on in 2012, we have reached about 40, and then our competitors also have about 40. And of course, the proof of the pudding is Regis also came in 2015 with their own setup of about 20 or so substance rooms. So currently in Labuan, there's about 100 substance office floating around offering facilities to clientele, those that want to use Labuan as a substance base. Then let me go into what we call typical clientele, what we do over the last 15 or 20 years or so. Let me concentrate on a few examples like trading. We have an IT company listed in the Nasdaq. The beneficial owner is in Canada, but he has also substantial operations in Asia for manufacturing as well as selling the products in Asia. So we set up 2 Labuan entities to do this transaction, to do this trading business. And there were about 4 or 5 people in Labuan and also branches in Hong Kong and other places, in Taiwan and China. And we have monthly board meeting and also annual physical meeting in Labuan as well. The banking transactions are done in Labuan, and also meetings are there, the staff are there, so that sort of covers that angle. Then we have also another typical client is a European client, want to utilize the facilities offered in China under the OEM models. And then they will set up a Labuan company to buy from China and sell back to Europe. And because this client is from Germany, he also be able to access the treaties offered between Germany and Malaysia, which, and for this case, with some substance, German authority also allowed the preferential, rebate, the lower tax for the dividends remitted back to the German beneficial owner. Now, let me go into, let's say, a fund management or fund administration case in Labuan. For example, we have a Korean client, has been with us for almost 15 years or so now. They set up an operation in Labuan, they hire people in Labuan, and they do the fund administration in Labuan. And it has so far no issue with the Korean tax authorities as well as the Malaysian tax authorities on that basis. Then we have another case of a captive insurance by an Australian group. This is one of my favorite stories of this. This Australian group has a license to operate a bus route in Melbourne, and they also assemble Volvo trucks in Melbourne. So they set up an insurance company, a captive insurance company in Labuan for insurance of future loss of business of the bus route, and also provide warranty for the Volvo cars to assemble in Melbourne or in Australia. It's been going on for about 8 to 10 years before it was quite successful with all the substance, the operations, the premium received, the payment out for warranty, all being done out Labuan. So this has been cases that we have gone through, just to give you an example, what we have been through for the last 10 to 15 years or so. Thank you.
Okay, great. So you can hear from Raymond that actually there's some actual examples of how corporations can actually use, well, create substance, so to speak. You've given a few clear examples. But I think at the end of the day, you mentioned also about the time. You know, some are already 15 years old, some are already 10 years old, some are pretty new. But of course, all these BAPS things is pretty new as well. Substance is one thing, but then if I may just turn to Kaim, if you don't mind. I mean, just now you talk about creating the substance. At the end of the day, and then Raymond spoke about, okay, these are the companies that have so-called substance. He talked about Regis, he talked about his own company offering this kind of services that can create. And he spoke about 4 or 5 people in one case. But at the end of the day, who really determines what is demonstrable substance? I mean, you know, it's such a wide term, substance, and it can mean many things.
Yeah.
If you want, can we just have a bit more details about that? Yeah.
Substance, I think, is like the traditional fable about the elephant. You can't quite describe it, but when you see it, you know it. So, and substance will mean different things to different people. So the substance that you need to create will actually depend on what it is that you are hoping to achieve. So you're hoping to be able to get the benefit of a double tax treaty, for example. Then you will need to look at, you know, which country is that double tax treaty with, and what is the type of benefit that you're trying to get from the treaty, and based on that, and based on the tax authority of that country, that will give you an indication of the type of substance you need. For example, if you are trying to get maybe just a reduction in the withholding tax rate, or for there not to be any withholding tax on, say, dividends, you know, depending on the country, they might require a more minimal standard of substance. They might, you know, the usual things which should always be there is physical office with employees in it, and of course, you know, with directors. Then depending on what you're trying to achieve, it could be further requirements of, you know, whether there were professional directors used, or were there actual executive directors on the ground in that country. And perhaps, you know, the bank accounts, the types of financing transactions that went through that country. So it really depends on what it is that you hope to achieve, and depending on the tax authority that you need to deal with. So some tax authorities will require more. You know, they might require that, you know, actual, very active management decisions being taken in that office, rather than, you know, for example, in Malaysia, residence is determined by management and control, and the usual perception is that if you have at least one directors meeting in Malaysia, and if you, in that directors meeting, you've taken, you know, management decisions which affect the company, then more or less you can say that from a purely tax law perspective, you've satisfied the management and control element, the requirement, and then you can be considered to be tax resident in Malaysia. So that is, you know, from a tax law perspective. But now with substance, people actually want to see more meat. They want more things. Hence the bank accounts, the physical presence, the employees, and things like that. But as I said, it depends on the country, it depends on the authority. I mean, the UK, for example, you know, and that is where we got our definition of resident management and control from the UK tax law. They still very much look at just that, management and control. So they don't require, you know, a massive hive of activity for there to be considered sufficient substance for residents. So it really depends on what it is you're trying to achieve, which tax authority you're hoping to satisfy.
I see. And also the kind of income streams that you're talking about. That
yes, obviously, yes.
That particular entity.
Yeah.
Okay, so many permutations. But I guess at the end of the day, I mean, Anil, you talk about, you know, it seems very onerous, all these BAPS things and all these compliance that we need to go through. But there is also some flip side in terms of benefits. People are saying that because of this, there will be a lot more transparency. Then as service providers also, then you know what is your client doing, so to speak, because you get to know a lot of information. And then there is also this flip side of simplicity now, in the sense that now you do not want to have so many layers. I mean, previously everybody wants to have layers and layers of companies. Now because of all these things, then probably you just need one layer, so to speak. And at the end of the day, it's also talking about a lot of reporting to be done, correct? I mean, from your presentation. So I guess there will be a lot more accuracy, because you do not want to give something which is not accurate and then you get punished for it. But that's a flip. That's a good side, so to speak. But at the end of the day, also it seems to be very onerous, right? All these requirements. I'm just wondering, what would be the future of offshore, so-called offshore centers? I mean, if they all have to do this, do you think there's a hope for them, or in terms of businesses or ahead?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. I think there is certainly hope for offshore centers, and there's still room for tax planning. Okay. But I think that there's going to be a lot more thought process put into place now before a structure is put up. For example, previously when somebody wanted to set up a structure, they may have put tax first and said, okay, well, if I want to invest into Indonesia, let's find a country which has a very good treaty with Indonesia, set up a holding company there, and just invest through that. Now, people are probably going to have to start thinking about business first and say, look, really, where are my business drivers? Where do I already have people? Where do I already have holding companies? Where do I already have substance? And work through that. I think the other key issue is that companies, especially the large multinational groups, who are very concerned about their reputation, are probably also going to start thinking about, look, if I do a transaction in a certain way, fine, maybe I can meet substance, maybe I can be transparent, I'm willing to disclose what I need to disclose. But if a third party finds out I'm doing this structure in this way, or if I need to put it as a footnote in my financial statements, or if the media gets hold of it, what is going to be the external perception? And therefore, it's important that the jurisdictions I'm using are reputable. And the fact that Labuan, for example, is closely affiliated with Malaysia, where we are very, very active in OECD discussions. Right. We are member to a lot of, and we are signatories to a lot of these papers. And the MCAA, for example, as we were discussing earlier, we have exchange of information, we have a whole host of tax treaties. That certainly, in my mind at least, puts Labuan in a good position, and as long as we continue to ride along with Malaysia's reputation.
Yeah. Just now you mentioned about this, I guess there will be a less tax-driven offshore structures, you did say. But at the end of the day, I think there are a lot of businesses, or rather a lot of businesses that can still go through offshore centers, so-called offshore centers internationally. I mean, people still want to do estate planning, for example. People still want to do asset protection structures, which are probably not tax-related in certain ways. So in that sense, that kind of niche area, there's still a lot of potential.
Absolutely, and I think if you look at these, a lot of these are governed or driven towards multilateral cooperation.
That's right.
So, for example, individuals who are looking to protect wealth, individuals who are looking to see what's the best way to really pass down their wealth and their businesses to the next generation. They certainly may be impacted in perhaps a less degree, or to a less degree than the large multinationals.
Yeah, and this is where Kaim was talking about foundations that you can set up in Labuan. Raymond, you want to add anything? Since you are operating in Labuan, we talk about the future of offshore centers. Although Labuan we don't call it an offshore center, but.
Thank you, Daniel. If I may say, basically, with all this introduction or the changing trend, definitely as a service provider, we would have to look at our own procedures and incorporate those inside it. But at the same time, we still believe there's still clients out there which want to use offshore centers, including Labuan as well.
All right. Okay, I think I've spoken enough. Panellists also has spoken enough. I would like now to throw open to the floor. If you have any questions, please. Anybody? Anything that you want to ask? Yes, please.
Mr. Wong, I would like to know about you start something in 2012, Step Malaysia. I think it's concerned about the Islamic Financial Funds Trust or some kind of thing, because in Hong Kong we have not so much chance to know about the Malaysian financial investment, as well as the new institution or movement of some kind. Will you kindly enough to say something about the step Malaysia of 20 and 12, sir?
But before that, may I ask, can you introduce yourself? Your name and where your organization that you represent?
Springfield Investment, Mr. Lau Heng Tao.
Okay. Raymond, yours.
Thank you, Mr. Lau. The STEP actually stands for Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners. It's just one of the branches of a global grouping that looks into any matters of trust, fiduciary matters, like, for example, BEPS, like Common Reporting System, Standard and all those things. It's not really linked to trust, not really linked to what we call the legislation in Malaysia. It's more like a grouping of members come here, come and discuss about common matters relating to trust and fiduciary matters. In Hong Kong, there's a STEP Hong Kong as well. So in Malaysia, I started that in 2012. It's more like a body. It's a society registered in Malaysia. So that's basically that part of it. It's not linked to what we call the trust legislation or what. It's more a discussion forum, a body. Does that answer your question? Or
Okay. Any more questions? Come. Anyone? Yeah, please. Your name? Yeah.
Aaron Nigam, a lawyer.
Okay.
Really one for Anil. Thank you, a very interesting presentation. Talking about moving profits offshore to reduce tax, Google, Apple, and Microsoft are very much in the news these days. Can you perhaps expand a little bit of what they've been up to and doing to bring their tax rate very low, in certain cases even zero?
Thank you for that question. So the question there was, certain tech companies who have been in the news a lot for reducing their taxes or perhaps paying almost no tax in the jurisdictions where they earn a lot of income from. In fact, some of these tech companies were actually called to explain themselves before the Senate, before government commissions, and were grilled. And it wasn't just the tax people who were called to represent the organizations, they actually called the CEOs and board members. And how these companies really achieved very low taxes in countries such as the UK and the US, in a lot of cases were in two ways. One, by placing IP hubs or intellectual property hubs outside the country. Typical jurisdictions they used were Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Ireland. And so large profits were paid back to these entities in these jurisdictions for the use of brand names, for the use of technology, and for the use of a lot of other things which were a bit hard to make tangible, but very easy from a transfer pricing perspective to justify a payment for. So the payments would go out of the US, out of the UK, to Ireland, Luxembourg, Netherlands, where there are very low rates of tax because of tax rulings, tax incentives, or because of special IP regimes that they have. And so that's ultimately how they actually achieved that. They are now sort of discussing with the tax authorities in these countries whether those arrangements were legitimate. Based on what the OECD is saying, they should certainly be legitimate from a legalistic perspective. I think now they are really discussing it from a moral perspective. Google has paid a little bit more tax in a couple of jurisdictions. But ultimately, if you look at what they're talking about in BEPS, it's really trying to come up with a uniform solution to all these things, because obviously we can take it on a country-by-country basis and a transaction-by-transaction basis and a multinational-by-multinational basis. But that would result in very disparate results. Some countries which perhaps have a bit more aggression may get more tax out of certain entities. Some countries which have less aggression or which are overly dependent, for example, on jobs created in their countries, or overly dependent for other reasons, they may find it a bit more difficult to extract their pound of flesh. So I think that in the past these countries have certainly studied these multinationals, but what they have been doing has been perfectly legitimate. BEPS is now trying to move the goalposts to say that, okay, this was legal before, now we change the rules such that it's perhaps not as legal and you've got to substantiate a lot more. And in fact, some of these multinationals are already taking steps to establish more substance in some of these jurisdictions where they have IP, where they have management. And some jurisdictions, for example, such Ireland, has phased out some of the incentives because of BEPS. They don't want to be viewed to be abusive. And they are taking steps up front to say, look, if you want to continue in our country and continue to enjoy this incentive, you've got to commit A, B, C, D to the country. So that's the landscape as we stand. As Daniel said earlier, it's still probably a moving goalpost. I think the goalpost may have moved from here to here now. If we are having this discussion in 10 years, we might not be able to see the goalpost. Might be so far down the field. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
And thank you again for the question.
Just to add to that, I was quite fascinated to hear Anil's presentation earlier when it came across that some of the countries that you wouldn't expect them to be were considered to have harmful tax practices. I mean, you will always think of the famous tax havens, the BVIs, the Caymans, as the jurisdictions that would be considered to be having harmful tax practices. But Anil was saying countries in Europe. And of course, the Belgium example. So it's quite interesting that all these countries that you would expect not to have harmful tax practices, everyday countries which are at the forefront of developed countries, of a developed country, of developed tax jurisprudence and tax systems, are actually guilty of this accusation.
Yeah. Okay. As a lawyer talking so guilty. Anybody else, please? If I may, Raymond, I just want to ask you. I mean, you talk about creating providing the facilities for substance creation. I mean, what is the one factor though? Why people choose Labuan? I mean, is there any reason? I mean, compared to, say, other jurisdiction, why would they want to come to Labuan?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Good question. Generally speaking, when we do comparisons, which we're very reluctant to do so, but the thing that I will focus more on is when any client come to us and say, here we are, we have reasonable operational costs, which Ms. Goh has said, very good low operational costs. For example, you set up an office in Singapore or in Hong Kong, and you set up an office in Labuan, you're talking about a 5 to 7 times difference. Of course, Hong Kong and Singapore, you got more to see, and when you work there. But in terms of in Labuan, when it comes to cost, the rental is definitely that low, and the facilities are okay, they're good. The IT infrastructure is equally good. Then, of course, you have the recruitment of staff. Other than the depreciation in ringgit, the cost of staff recruitment in Labuan, it's about 3 times lower than in Hong Kong, or even more, and even in Singapore as well. So on that basis, when you start a business or in Labuan, you have that lower cost base to start with, which is a huge benefit if you want to start with a limited range of capital. Thank you.
Okay. And you didn't mention that we are tax-free, right?
Sorry?
Duty-free, you can drink as much alcohol as you want. I was told.
Okay. I mean, those are what we call peripheral benefits, side benefits. Labuan is actually a duty-free territory or island. When you can import cars with no duty, you can import alcohol or drink alcohol with no tax, so quite cheap, and as well as beer and also cigarettes. But those are things that it's up to one individual choice.
Okay. Thank you. All right. We digress a bit. Yeah, please. Any more questions from the floor, please? Yes. Yeah. The mic will be given to you.
Hi, my question's at Mr. Anil Puri.
Anil. Okay.
You mentioned a lot about BEPS developments. So, one thing we keep getting questions from clients is also, where do Singapore, Hong Kong, and maybe China and India stand in respect of different action plans? That's one question. And the second question is, Malaysia, you said, is on to the agreement, the multilateral agreement. So is CBC expected to come in there fairly soon?
So I'll take the second question first. The question was Malaysia's signatory to the MCAA, the Multilateral Convention, and the question is whether CBCR will come into Malaysia. So this convention is really the agreement between countries to really agree when CBCR is in place in all the countries, how they will exchange information, and what the mechanism will be. We don't have anything yet in Malaysian law to allow for CBCR. In fact, a lot of countries don't have it yet. But we believe that it will certainly be one of the key action plans that the tax authorities will look at. So there are 15 action plans. I think number 13 on CBCR is probably the one that's at the forefront for a couple of reasons. One being the tax authorities are very focused already on transfer pricing in Malaysia. And they've come a long way very quickly. And they are quite sophisticated, or getting more sophisticated from a transfer pricing perspective. And secondly, I think a lot of countries are going to be motivated to adopt CBCR because of the secondary reporting issue I mentioned earlier. So if your country doesn't require it, you could result in a multinational which is really homegrown from your country, reporting first to a foreign tax jurisdiction on the whole group's profile, which is obviously not a good thing. So you'd want that to be controlled at least, or received at least by your home tax authority first. So for those reasons, I think that we certainly don't have it yet, but it will certainly be one of the things that they will look at. And in discussions with the authorities, they have said that this is one of the key action points they're looking at, and they are going to look towards implementing it sooner rather than later. So I don't think we'll meet the first round of reporting. The 31st January financial year ends, which need to report by next year, but hopefully soon after that.
All right.
In relation to the next question, you asked how Hong Kong, Singapore, China, and India are reacting to BEPS. Different countries obviously react very differently. I think Singapore may be almost on the same platform as Malaysia. For a long time, we were wait and see, and now they're perhaps looking to prioritize certain action plans, and CBCR is certainly one of them. India, I think the Indian tax authorities really do what they want when they want, and they've probably been at the forefront of tax aggression even before BEPS came into place. I think BEPS may just have given them a few additional pointers on what to look out for. And my thinking at least is that India will probably be one of the more aggressive jurisdictions, simply because they've always been one, and they are quite a sophisticated tax regime. China has already started publishing draft transfer pricing guidelines and so on late last year, and China is very much focused on BEPS. One of the action plans I didn't have a chance to talk about was Action 15, a multilateral instrument. The multilateral instrument is really an instrument where all the countries will sign, or a number of countries will sign, which will automatically include additional clauses within their tax treaties. So for example, if China has a tax treaty with India, and India has a tax treaty with Malaysia, the conventional way to include things like limitation of benefits, to include some of the other things that have been proposed, would be to renegotiate each treaty individually. And we know that the way that governments work, there's a lot of red tape. It could be 100 years before all treaties are renegotiated. By that time, a meteor could have hit and the planet may not be here anymore. So instead, what they're proposing is that this multilateral instrument, all countries will sign on it, and immediately all the treaties which involve the countries which are signed will be amended or changed. And there's an ad hoc working group of about 90 odd countries which are working on this right now. The chair of that group is UK. Interestingly, one of the vice chairs is China. China, Morocco, and the Philippines. So very diverse countries. And it just shows that China is taking a very great interest in how BEPS progresses, and they are being very involved in what goes on. So I think to answer your question simply, different countries are probably at a different stage of maturity and acceptance, but a lot of the countries which you talked about are in some way already recognizing that they need to do something around BEPS. Hong Kong, I'm not too sure, to be honest.
Has Hong Kong signed the agreement?
No, I don't think Hong Kong has signed the multilateral agreement. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Yes, please.
Firstly, thanks a lot to Anil for your very interesting presentation today. Much appreciated. This is my first exposure to BEPS, and really, I mean, I'm more from the private client kind of space, so things like CRS, Common Reporting Standards, etc., we're very up to date on. How will BEPS be implemented? Who will need to do the disclosures? For instance, with Common Reporting Standards, that's left to banks, insurance companies, asset managers, these kinds of advisors. Is BEPS intended to be self-reporting and self-disclosure? How does it work?
Okay, thank you very much. I think the first thing to note about BEPS is that it is an OECD initiative, so it's not really legislation per se, and a lot of people are referring to it as soft law. So, something that's really recommended, but whether or not it's implemented in each country really depends on the individual countries. And some action points are perhaps more recommended than others. So, country by country reporting is at the forefront. Some of the other action points, such as control foreign corporation rules, such as the disclosure of aggressive tax planning rules, those are more recommendation-based plans rather than mandatory plans. So as to who is responsible, the OECD has come up with recommendations, but ultimately in a lot of cases it may come down to the countries to determine who is responsible for reporting. So for example, if we go back to that disclosure of aggressive tax planning steps, which I talked about earlier, Action 12, the OECD has recommended that it could be the promoter of a scheme or the taxpayer who's responsible for reporting. Each country which then implements that action plan will need to decide, is it the promoter or is it a combination of promoter and taxpayer? And each country can perhaps even differ, and they can say somebody else has to report, the auditors, for example. But I think it still remains to be seen in a lot of cases. Some of them really most of them require taxpayers or the people who are paying tax to disclose things to the tax authority, who will then be responsible for sharing it between all the tax authorities. Some of the more unusual ones are perhaps that Action 12, where it could involve somebody other than the taxpayers, for example, a promoter, who will then need to become involved in this disclosure process. Okay. I hope that helps. I think we're still really learning a little bit more as to how this is going to work in practice, but that at least is the theory of it.
Can I just ask a supplementary?
Sure, yeah, please. Very quick one.
Just more at a practical level, I went to another conference 2 days ago about tax authorities exchanging information, and suddenly one's inundated with tax forms, banking forms, I think, having to complete pages of FATC for the US, and then they say DOTs coming in the UK. Can you just perhaps explain the connection between the three areas, reporting on tax income and individuals, things like that, and what you're saying, putting forward tax schemes? Just how does it all link together in a way?
Okay, and let me just see if I understand the question correctly. So you said there's obviously a lot more disclosure required, things like FATCA, for example,
yes.
And how do all these different disclosure regimes, which seem to be running in parallel, how do they really
and what's the
connect
relevance of completing this FATC form that HSBC and other people are sending us now?
Are you American? You're not American, are you? Okay.
Yeah, well, you look a little tired, so you must be up late nights filling in those forms, which are really thick. Unfortunately, there isn't really an official link between all these different initiatives. So FATCA and BEPS, for example, are not really linked. I think really from the perspective of taxpayers and corporations, the key is going to be how internally do you then make that link to make it easier to gather information. And when you automate a system, you've got to think about not just BEPS or not just FATCA or not just whatever other disclosure requirements you're meant to comply with. You're meant to try and draw everything together, because as you can think about, or as you can appreciate, it's going to be, one, very time consuming to comply with all these different requirements, and two, potentially very expensive, because you need to hire more people, you need to update your IT systems, you may need an external consultant to tell you whether what you're doing is correct or not. especially during the initial reporting stages. So I think the short answer is there is no official connection between these, but what we'd probably recommend to any corporation who's looking to embark on these very onerous disclosure requirements is that internally you've got to sort of figure out what you need to disclose and to whom. And when you automate your systems and when you hire people to look at these, you've got to see how you can sort of link them together to really achieve economies of scale and to ensure that you're not duplicating work.
Okay, thank you very much. Guess we were coming to the close, but before I close, any of the panelists want to have concluding remarks on what anybody want to say anything? Okay, so if not, you want to say something? Okay, Anil, please.
So I think that it's going to be an interesting couple of years. A lot of this is theory. When practice comes into place, I think certain changes may need to be made simply because some things will be difficult to implement. And I think obviously regimes like Labuan and others are going to be very interested to see how this is implemented in practice and what we need to change internally perhaps to comply and to keep us at the forefront. Because we are starting out at a very good position, and we just have to make sure we stay with that.
I think certainly there will be a lot more job creation at the end of the day. And like I say also, you just said it also, international offshore centers or financial centers will still be very relevant maybe in other niche business.
I just wanted to add from a legal perspective that, and I think Anil had touched on it. I mean, one should bear in mind that BEPS is an initiative that is being proposed, but it's still up to each individual country how they adopt it, and which of the proposals they would actually adopt and how they legislate in their respective countries in terms of what they require, in terms of who does what reporting. So it is really a set of proposals that have been put forward by OECD, and obviously it will be taken very seriously because all countries want to be part of this committee of countries that comply and follows these proposals. But there will be, I don't think it will necessarily be identical across all countries. And also the emphasis on which of the action plans come first. So it's still up to each individual country to legislate as they deem fit and appropriate.
And I think following from that, the OECD's goal when they started all this was to have a uniform set of rules for everyone. But as Chaim said, it's not necessary that every country adopts everything in the same way. And we've already seen some countries accelerate adoption. And when they accelerate adoption, they may adopt it more aggressively. So while the ideal world would have been to see every country having the same rules, so if you're a multilateral corporation, you at least know what you need to report where, and it'll be a lot more easier to collect data and to streamline data. I think, unfortunately, when it comes to practice, we are still going to find a bit of a divergence between what different countries want. So there is going to be a need to perhaps gather more information in certain countries and less in others. And somebody needs to keep track, because certainly if country A doesn't need the whole gamut of information, you don't want to have to accidentally give it to them. Because the more you give, the more questions you might perhaps be asked.
We'll see what happens 10 years down the road. Okay, with that, I think we have come to the end of this panel session. I would like to once again thank the panelists, of course. And of course, also thanks to you for attending this session and this masterclass. I hope you have enjoyed. And I hope also you will be going back with some added knowledge about what BEPS is all about and how you can create substance and where is the right place for you to do it in terms of creating substance. So with that, once again, if I can join me to just give some applause to the panelists and to the speakers, Chaim, Anil, and Raymond. Thank you.